Hey guys, Happy New Year! We're back for another year of illustration and assignments and this apprenticeship I hope offers you even more of an educational experience than last year's. Last year was the first year of apprenticeship. That was when I first opened it up, so it's been a full year of Apprentice for some of you as an apprentice. So I really would love some feedback on your experience as an apprentice this past year, what you've learned, what it's changed about your portfolio. I would love some feedback if you guys could write it into the general discussion in the Discord. This year's assignment was assigned in December, and it is a full illustration guided by a narrative. Your assignment for this month is a fully rendered illustration. Please write one paragraph narrative for the character in your illustration, accompanied with 3 gesture studies, thumbnails for the background environment, all leading to a final illustration. The creative story is full reign, but must include all of these listed textures along with all the other texture components you write for the story. So your stuff as well as the stuff required for the illustration. Jade, jagged rock, glass, metallic surface such as armor or a gold-plated object, clouds, cascading fabric of some kind. So these are all required. So I'm just going to repeat them: jade, jagged rock, glass, metallic surface, clouds, and any cascading fabric. So a lot of you have included these. Thank you so much to those who did complete the work. I understand it was overlapping the Christmas holiday season, but you know, there should have still been time somewhere between there to get the story out, to get some thumbnails out at least. A lot of the part of the apprenticeship is learning to work with deadlines. This is very important and pivotal for your development as a professional. People will go to you with deadlines of their own that you have to work within so that you can get paid and you can keep it all going. So remember that to be an apprentice, you have to finish your homework. It's required. Even components of the homework are acceptable. Obviously, I would want it all completed as an entire piece and hand it in so that you get the educational experience from the critique, but as well as the mileage experience to get those mistakes done with and in the past so you can move on to better things. The less work you do, the less experience, less mileage you're building. So the story for this character is that she was in a forced marriage with a hypocrite of a priest, kind of like a backwards priest. And the sword that she's holding is the sword that belonged to her father. So it's a moment of liberty. She's been liberated. She finally killed the monster that she had been forced to marry, and she burned the castle down that he lived in. And she escaped. She took his robe and soiled it across the soil as she walked away. And she took a goblet. I forget what the goblet was about. Probably from something to sell, so that she could have some money of her own. And the colors, the landscape, everything looks beautiful. But there are some components missing. I'd start with the shape and silhouette of the castle. Kind of just looks like a burning heap of something. I would rather you have had some work invested into the castle. It's kind of sitting in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't feel like it belongs to any royalty. It just feels like a simple house that she burned down. I would love some really wonderful silhouette, something colossal, something larger, more gothic, or something that looks like a cathedral. Just something in the distance like that with more breathing room, not just a big solid clump of smoke, but something along the lines of the castle we see in Beauty and the Beast. Very pointy, very sharp, very aggressive looking castle. So it looks like the area where the enemy resides. And then with her, remember that the accumulation, so what I've written here is, please remember to take advantage of your camera angle's power to help tell a story. So this camera angle is great. And watch previous Critique Hour and book covers. Scroll up to the Sword Dancer challenge here in the announcements text channel in the Discord to find the Sword Dancer challenge and what we talk about framing. The purpose of this challenge is that all the challenges of the year are combined as one. So gesture, expression, and costume for character building, environment and depth for creating space, camera angle and lighting for telling the story cinematically, and all form and rendering workflow techniques from there, like light on form. So what I'm trying to say is the expression she has, as well as how she's walking, she does not seem, it seems like a stock image of someone walking. It doesn't seem like a character who has been, I'm sorry for the graphic description, who's been raped constantly and has finally liberated herself. Doesn't seem like a woman that has been in prison for a long time, who lost the only person she loves, which was her father, to this maniac, and she finally killed him and got away. This is a beautiful story to tell, about empowerment and freedom and fighting for your freedom. Her expression does not mean she's seen horrors. So when you kill somebody, it changes you forever. But when you're writing a story about a character that had to liberate themselves by taking the life of another person, and then you look back at the face you drew here, it's not syncing up, it's not reflecting. So what I'm going to do is start off with the expression, because really this is her who's run away. Actually, before the expression goes in, I want to make one quick mention, is the gesture. The gesture should be more expressive than the face expression, so write that down. Gesture should be more expressive, and if you want to write it down in the general discussion after I've uploaded this, and just to show me that you've been writing down, you know, show off your notes, feel free to do that. But the gesture expression should be more important to you than the facial expression in an illustration, because you don't have the ability to zoom up. You know, your audience isn't going to zoom up. What if this is going to be like some kind of magic card, or some kind of poster or loading screen for a game, or some kind of book cover? You're not going to ask the audience to scroll up to the face, zoom up to the face, just to tell the story, just to get the story across. The body should do it. If I was the one who was liberated and I had to kill somebody, I wouldn't just walk away without looking back. I'd take one last look back, and that would be the moment the cameraman just takes a photo of me. That would be the moment that the director stops for a moment and says, everybody be quiet, let's just leave the camera rolling, and let's just have one long shot of her looking behind her. Those are the moments that really matter, that last look back. So instead, I would have just completely hidden her face. Maybe her face would have been seen in three-quarter view of some kind, but her body should have been rotated, looking back at that castle as it burned up in flames. That way you refocus the direction of the sight back to the castle, and you have this consistency in how you're trapping the audience within the canvas. So she's looking back at the castle. One last look back. Oops, that kind of threw us off. The symmetry line threw us off. She's kind of looking back at the castle one more time. Shoulder behind shoulder. And then shoulder here. Legs ready to move forward. And then maybe she's holding the fabric this way. Maybe she's holding the fabric this way. The goblet in one hand, and the sword of her father in the hilt in the other, on the other side of the body. So she's taking one last look back this way, and that way we have a beautiful kind of twisting happening with the fabric of her body. Part of her body is looking that way, and part of her body is looking that way, and so we have this twisting of the fabric, which could have been enough for one of those texture requirements. The texture requirements really had no narrative importance. They didn't have some kind of mystical combination between all of them. It was just me trying to give you guys an opportunity to challenge yourselves a little bit with the texture changes across the illustration and get you guys into more familiarity with looking up references. So this look back would have been more of a powerful moment. I could have given her strong, proud. That's why I'm doing an outward C shape for her chest, because she's actually very, very proud. She's not defeated. She's very proud. She's very strong. She knows what she's done, and she knows it was necessary. And then you have the gentle, kind of feminine physique looking backward, looking forward as she's twisting her body. So one foot would be here, one foot ready to move forward, and her head looking the rest of the way. The castle could have had some kind of, you know, really Baroque, I guess the term is, a silhouette to it. It could have had some more steepley type of tops to the towers. And it could have just been burning up in flames just like that. I don't think the smoke would reach that high. I think it would just be, I mean, it maybe would be if it was a massive castle. I'm not sure how she pulled off burning it all into flames, maybe with oil lamps or something that she could have thrown around. But I would say make the smoke more transparent towards the top, so it's just a little bit less demanding of the canvas, instead of a big black shape just sitting there eating up the canvas space. Objects in the foreground are always darker than objects in the background. But before I get into that, I'm just going to get into the expression. So the expression of horror, we're just going to work with the expression you do have, but I do encourage you for your correction to please go back and adjust the gesture so that it's a little bit more expressive, even if she's just walking forward. I'm going to make her eyes open all the way. She knows what she just did, and she feels nothing, just relief. But at the same time, she's a good woman, so she doesn't feel comfortable 100% with having killed someone. Kind of like the dead look that Sleeping Beauty gets when she gets possessed. If you have trouble with expression, cartoons are the best place to start. That's why you always see me referencing Disney, because they invested a lot of their time and research into the best expression. That every frame was so meditated. It took them years, almost a decade to finish Sleeping Beauty, or more than a decade actually. So they took a lot of time. Every single frame, though it may seem like millions of frames, every single frame was specifically chosen. The expressions were very specific. Some of them were failed, like when she first opened her eyes. I'd say that is the most awkward scene in animation. But I'm trying to get rid of that smile, but at the same time, it's not sadness. It's no more sorrow. Her sorrow is, you know, when she lived there. This is no more sorrow. This is just pure strength and determination. Okay, so a little bit less happy, a little bit more in feeling of nothing. And then we have the negative space against the positive space. Negative space meaning the background against all of this foreground that should be darker. It's going to take me a little bit, so bear with me. But what I love is a lot of you would never have really written something like this or worked on a piece like this if it wasn't for the apprenticeship. And the apprenticeship is here to challenge you. So that's why I really love it when you guys finish your homework. It's a challenge in your life that would never have been thrown onto you as a mandatory, as a necessary. And that's what the apprenticeship is here for, to challenge you in new ways and to encourage you in new ways. Take advantage of it. You know, you're here for a reason. Even if it seems daunting, even if you don't finish the work, you may not finish this month's work, but having pushed yourself, you'll probably finish next month's work. I have no idea where I started this. Oh, there we go. You'll probably finish next month's work, and the next month after that, because you pushed yourself that degree higher each month. But you got to start somewhere. Okay, so I'm just going to save this lasso before I lose it, and I usually do. And I'm going to select the inverse, and I'm going to darken her with a darken color, an atmosphere value. And that's just going to be, what's the sky color? That's what the atmosphere color is. When you darken large objects in one sweeping motion, you're not darkening them based on their individual colors and how each green or each blue darkens. You're washing one large atmosphere color on top of them. And that's kind of how we build these scenes. We don't really get a lot of this in the real world as much. And then I darken that, and I'm going to select inverse again, and then just lighten the background behind her. Maybe with a simple lighten layer that might work enough. Oopsie. That might be just enough. It's just the sky color. It's a little bit strong here. There we go. Starting to work a little better. Just need to push that into midtones. Okay. Darken. Whoops. Darken. Just throwing these colors back down a little. And then select inverse, and I'm just going to burn on shadows. This is just the necessary amount of darkness needed in this scene. So we've adjusted the color and the shadow color to reflect what's required for her presence in the atmosphere. And then what we're doing now with burn tool is that we've darkened each individual color now. But not before we've adjusted one large wash that includes the blue. As you can see, that wash that I used had a blue in it. And that's the color of the atmosphere. That's how you make colors harmonious. You always ask yourself, what is the atmosphere color? Because that's what's deciding what stays light, what stays dark, what's saturated, what's not. And the reason why it feels off when she's looking this way is because she's just pretty much looking at the edge of the canvas. She's not building a relationship with the rest of the canvas. And I would want her to do that. I'm going to try to darken her some more. She's kind of like in the shadow of this entire mountain. Oops, see, I knew I'd lose it. Select inverse. And I'm just going to continue darkening. So I found that shadowy color here, somewhere blue, some average looking blue color, and I'm just going to add more blue to it as I darken it. And that's what I use on darken. And I'm just throwing that on top of her. Another really cool thing that you can do is just darken the environment around her. And so I'm just going to darken like one big shadow moving down on the ground around her. But take a look at this. I'm going to select it all, go back to before I did that, and then redelete using a soft brush because the mountain is so far away, its cast shadow is very bright. I mean soft, because the sun is bright, but it's also a lot of overcast. And I'm just going to have a little bit of a body of light just moving around so she can be relieved through that shadow. And then again, I'm going to do the same thing and darken over there. And that's a cinematic darken. That's me saying, hey, look at this castle that's burning up in flames. There's no hope for it, so I'm going to cast it in some shadow, but at the same time, I'm casting that darkness of, you know, what she has done over her. So I'm not throwing that shadow everywhere, so I'm deleting wherever it touched. I'm trying to create a more defined border here. I'm also going to just relieve some of this water. Water is very reflective. It'll reflect any light nearby. And then with her, if you feel like she's too dark now, you can go back and introduce some brightness. Another problem is with texture here, is that your texture is a touch too dark. Reflective surfaces like metal or armor or steel, they are just like water. They will be very reflective. They will represent the surrounding environment. They won't stay dark. Maybe moments of reflection if the blade is facing towards the ground or a dark rock. It'll probably take the darkness of that rock. But you are the artist, and it's your world, and you're drawing a blade. You want to make that blade say something, especially if the spirit of a character, of a loved character, is in there. So I would give it a bit more brightness. And if you feel like her face is lost in some shadow, that's okay, because what we can do is invent our own bounce light coming off from the surrounding environment. But imagine her looking back right here. A nice twisting of the waist, some fabric, her looking back at the burning castle that she created, that she caused. The sword not really pointing up in this really stiff Barbie doll position, but something a little bit more kind of like relaxed, or maybe she's holding the sword of her father as if she is holding her father, with a little bit more love. She seems like she's very proud of what she's done, so you have that. But for it to look exceptionally professional, I recommend a change. I'm going to try to separate this environment from the stones behind. Everything just seems to be melting in. And then maybe you could have some more separation. For instance, this distance section here could be susceptible to more atmospheric perspective. This piece as well. just like that. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is objects in the foreground don't necessarily stay dark. They do have a dark component to them. They are dark, absolutely. They do necessarily stay dark, but what I'm trying to say is they are dark in contrast. So they have as much white as they have black sometimes, especially if the POV, I mean the POI, which is the point of interest, is in the foreground, middle, or something in between foreground and middle ground. So that means I'm going to get my dodge tool and I'm going to try to bring out some of the highlights in her face. Select inverse. And there's no reason why we can't. And then I'm going to bring back some of that light everywhere else. Some of the brightness in her hair. So she is still technically part of a value average that drops, necessary enough for the foreground to behave properly. But it's not so much of a value drop that she's just an absolute silhouette walking around, and that she has absolutely no highlights to her, because when you lose value that climbs, you're losing form, and we don't want that. I'm also going to grab a darkish blue, because the lower she goes, the less important it is for us to apply detail. So that means I can darken the lower half here as she moves lower towards the ground. See that? We don't miss that extra bit of brightness that we had. Look at the navigator. We don't miss that brightness at all. It's just working. And then right over here, just as the light breaches over the mountain, we have some of the fabric catching the light, just like that. And I'm going to illuminate that. And that just looks wonderful. And maybe it's reflecting some of that light really strongly back up. And that kind of soiled little bit of fabric. It's not so much for the priest that we're illuminating this fabric, it's for her. And I'm actually going to capture this whole section. I've got to make that fabric blur, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, because this cast shadow belongs to the mountain, which is far away from the light source, which is the sun. And that sharp shadow, it's not straight sunlight. Even if it was straight midday sunlight, the mountain is so big, its distance between its ceiling and the, its height and the surface of the earth, it's just too far a distance, so that is enough time for the sun to seep in and blur the cast shadow. So I'm just trying to blur it just so that it doesn't take over the scene and it's not super sharp. And in here, you can sneak in some of that environment color, and we'll talk about environment color and color balance again in a second. Okay, so the color balance that I want to discuss, it has to do with the green of her shirt. You can grab in, if you're trying to illuminate parts of her that are now drowned in shadow, you can bring in the actual sky color. This is a great trick. Everybody uses it because it's accurate. You can bring in the sky color itself to illuminate the character. Look at my color that I've chosen. Opacity is 10%, and that's what I'm using on her. I'm just going to get rid of that outline. Not sure why it's there. I think it's because of lasso. But that outline needs to go. I need to make her hair color a little bit more distinct against the background. Alright, always save your lasso. See how helpful that's been? And darken. Oops, select inverse. And that's what I'm throwing over here. Just so she stays separate from the background. If you want to make her look more angelic, what you can do is bring in some saturation, tons of saturation. Wherever the sun is breaching, remember, we're not just doing things willy-nilly. We're thinking about the presence of the sun right now and what it's allowing to happen. So I'm actually going to zoom out so I can do this much better. I'm going to go on mid-tones first, much more tame setting for the dodge tool. And I'm just throwing that over here, just behind her. All her liberation, all her freedom now in the saturation that she's, this line of saturation that she's passed almost like she's glowing. She may have killed somebody, but she didn't necessarily do the wrong thing. She freed herself in self-defense against imprisonment. So that's the saturation we're bringing back. And if you think it's a little bit too much, it's just separation, which I like it. But if you think it's a bit too much, you can tone it down. Use only mid-tones on the dodge tool setting. And I'm just throwing this over top. And just a little bit of fog. Never hurt anyone. It's a nice amount of, I see the bottle here, by the way. I didn't see that bottle. A lot of you had no idea where to put the glass requirement for the textures, so I just threw it in the thing. Oh, I do have to select inverse. I mean, I do have to deselect when I'm throwing in the fog, as her feet kind of started floating. Okay, I'm gonna just where her feet are. This is a moment where grass really is hiding the feet, so I would be okay with you hiding the feet here. Her feet should not look like they're just walking on top of the grass blades, but within them. And now, because you see how zoomed out I am, I'm addressing some large gradients moving in this scene. And it's mostly about her. But I do have to ask you to go back and adjust these areas here. What is going on with the smoke? They should have a bit more of an intriguing shape for the smoke. Look up an actual castle burning down. What does that look like? Fire in midday. So fire midday house. Let's see what happens. What that looks like. Okay, so we have, alright, so this is a pretty cool, I mean, it's very sad, but I'm so sorry, I don't mean to look this stuff up, but you see the shapes here are very interesting. It's also a cloudy day, so you can have the smoke be darker than the environment around. But everything feels very similar. You can see hints of red and yellow and all these beige colors, almost skin tone colors. Desaturated, but skin tone realm in the fire here. Very warm looking smoke colors. These colors here are very strong textures, so it's from a distance. Burning castle. I mean, it doesn't have to be burning castle. You can just look up castle and then add after that. This looks like a great reference or inspirational reference. This looks great too, the smoke here. I think that's some low budget, I'm not sure if this is real, but it looks like low budget visual effects on like Merlin or something. What else? And then you've just got evil castle. So let's look up evil castle as a form of reference. Look at that. That's something that you could have picked up from. This is just what I mean by sharp. I mean, the composition itself is very muddy and very dark. This is a great reference here. It didn't have to be a lot of detail, but it could have had some more sharpness in the silhouette detail, not in illumination or contrast detail. Okay, so that's a lot to pull from. It helps you tell the story. I lost my pen, so give me a second. I'm gonna do some yoga to reach it. All right. Now let's take a look at the before and after and see what kind of changes we have in the environment. As for the length of your the width of your canvas, that's really wide canvas. It works though. I like it, but it's a bit strong. So I would shrink that canvas a little bit, and so that you can challenge yourself a bit, because this little piece of mountainous build like here, it doesn't have to take that much space. The piece in the middle between the castle and herself. Before, see how far away she is from the from the castle, but she has as much contrast as the castle. That's almost no atmospheric perspective at all. We spent a lot of time on that atmospheric perspective. And then you have the possibility that you might center her, or a little bit off center, so that she can be standing there looking back at the castle that she's burned down, with the sword of her father kind of just resting on the ground. Okay, so really, really nice composition. I like what you did with the kind of sliding effect of the mountains. Looks like it looks like you found a reference of some sort of Icelandic environment. It looks really beautiful. Let's move on. Trying to understand what's happening with Photoshop. Oh, okay. Yes. Let's move on to the demon, which I really wanted to talk about, and this has a lot to do with gesture. So a lot of you are missing some of the textures I required. Maybe this is the glass, maybe this is the jade, the metallic surface, the jagged rock. So you do have a lot of it. I love the Frazetta 80s retro style comic book cover, kind of that gothic metal, almost fantasy style comic book cover. So I love that. I like the colors. I don't mind that off purple so much. It's a weird purple. It's not really bright, but it's definitely working somehow, especially because the purple itself isn't falling on the demon, so it looks like a sun behind him and he's just hiding from the sun. We might have to take care of that though, because it is part of the physical requirement, physics, I mean, of light on form, that this light here breaches and falls on him. Helps to reveal some of his finer anatomy. Alright, so we're just throwing some of that, just a slight amount, just to show that this actual object here that I've used is in front of him, not off behind. As for his gesture, so we're talking about the accumulation of the real deal behind an illustration. So let's recap again. Let's talk about them again. And this may be a simple little paragraph in the announcements, but it's a thesis. It's me describing, putting into words the most complicated aspects of creating an illustration. So the purpose behind this is to showcase all the challenges from this year combined as one. Gesture, expression, and costume for character building. Gesture, expression, and costume are titans in character building. Gesture is the body, the shape, the character, what they're doing, the narrative involved in what they are doing, and what they are doing in the anatomical requirements and knowledge to pull that doing off. Expression is the people, the person, the individual, the how much of that character you can explain, you can express in their expression. Expression also includes character trope and what you're pulling from. So this is like demon but handsome demon, so he's got something of a beauty triangle but he has no eyebrows, so it's kind of a villain. So I can read that off. Usually you guys are just always spot on with your portraits, but when it comes to expression, you guys have no idea what you're writing. He looks submissive. He looks like he's scared of this object. He doesn't look like he's curious or doesn't feel like he's powerful enough to do anything with it. He's kind of relaxed. Character that isn't submissive curiosity-wise or knowledge-wise is a character that's leaning forward, almost ready to touch the glass. Why not go for that movement? He looks like he's either bored of it, hiding from something, is submissive. I mean, his leg stance, his arms back. He doesn't look like a bored king. That doesn't look like a throne room of any kind. Yes, relaxed back can depict a sense of confidence, but not in relation to what you wrote, which is this character has discovered his form of power that he doesn't know how to deal with, but is going to do what it takes. And sometimes desperate situations call for desperate measures, as you wrote. So he's about to do something. He's about to do something phenomenal in order to harness the power of this thing. Maybe he's going to cut his belly open and ingest it. Maybe he's going to eat the glass. Maybe he's going to do something crazy, something gothic and gory and metal, you know what I mean. So in order for us to believe that he's capable of taking the tough measures when they're required, he needs a better gesture. Where he is right now in the atmospheric perspective ladder, though, the mid-ground, I mean, foreground looks great. It's nice and dark, not dark enough considering there's two bright light environments happening. The glow of the horizon that's yellow, and this Mars type of, I guess that is like everything is based in Mars when it came to retro 80s style metal book covers, like Frazetta styles. Everything looked like it was happening on Mars. You know, everything was red. So that kind of Mars atmosphere, I love it, the colors, but the foreground should still be dark considering the light is behind, causing all those rim lights, which are actually flattening the midground. So gesture, expression, costume, and then you have environment and depth for creating space, camera angle, and lighting for telling the story cinematically. So the camera angle, is it really in the best spot? It looks like it's a stage and the character is just in an opera of some kind. It's a very simple stage, although it feels like I'm just going to see heads pop in here because that's just where the audience is sitting and it's just a very simple stage setup. Where would the camera have been ideally so that to show that he is about to do something crazy? I think the camera under his arm while he's reaching for the glass in the background, that would have been amazing. Something that to show that he is very strong, but at the same, he's towering over, so the camera is under him to show he's huge. But at the same time, he's a little bit like his hands are shaking, and that he knows what this glass ball is capable of. He knows what kind of crazy powers and magic it contains, but he's about to break the glass. And just, introduce himself to that magic and become an even bigger version of himself, or maybe even die because he's not strong enough. So that kind of storytelling, when you have the camera in the ideal spot, and then you have the middle ground, foreground, background all established, and then you introduce the light source, you're doing so much already without ever having drawn his face. You're all pointing the camera at the face. And the first rule of acting is that never cater to the camera. The camera loves you and adores you, but you ignore it. That's a good thing. That's the best way to act. You don't want to always tilt your head towards the camera, always, you're just in love with the kind of having the camera staring at you, and the camera's looking at you, and you're aiming yourself to the camera. Everything is always aimed to the camera when you guys draw, because you want to draw a face. But sometimes it's more powerful and you're doing more with showing less. So maybe him not necessarily visible, maybe a little bit of shadow, some glowing eyes. That would have been cooler for us to see that he is a dangerous creature, but he's also face to face with something horrifying, which is pretty abstract and pretty advanced, an illustration topic for you to choose, because you do have to balance a lot of nuance here. But the gesture leaning forward could be something you could remedy for now, and then you could restart the challenge later and redo it. Some thumbnails would have been great for you to experiment with which one reads more fear, at the same time power. Again, very abstract, very nuanced, very delicate theme you have going on, fear but power. It's very difficult. I would have a lot of trouble rendering that and figuring that out. But I would start with a forward haunched, kind of like reaching towards the hand. You'd have the hand breaching through the outline, because him and the castle right now are one object in the greater picture. In the simple cutout shape language of this entire scene, you got one triangle, and that's it. You don't have anything breaching, and then you've got the sphere. So if I were to recreate your illustration, it'd be triangle, triangle, sphere. Excuse me, 1 second. So in order for that to stop, we have to like bridge something in here, throw in some more shapes to break this, to break all of this, to do something where we don't have this boring setup anymore. So his hand reaching forward, his body crouched forward, a little bit of fear in that he's holding the rocks beside him, but a lot of courage in that he's leaning forward. He's ready to kind of do whatever he has to do with the glass, maybe not reaching forward, maybe reaching forward to hold it, and then throw it up, and then smack it on the ground so that it can break into pieces, and then just take what comes out of it. So that's a great frame for us to choose. Another key frame that I'm talking about, when the girl was standing looking back at the castle. This is another wonderful key frame to look at. Which would the cameraman feel is worth the shot? Is this worth a shot? He seems really relaxed and kind of bored. Kind of like there's a spirit stuck in here and he's having a conversation with it. That's as far as you're going right now with what you've done. Not the colossal magic that you've written. Almost always what we write is impossible to render for us. That's the challenge. What we imagine is not what we're capable of doing, and that's the movement forward, to be ultimate creators, to be creators. And that's not working here, in that you've created something that seems like it's a smaller world. You've built a smaller world. So in order to pull off what you intended, along with controlling your environment here, you need to choose a better camera angle and a better gesture. Expression isn't going to do much for you, because look at how small a space expression takes up in the greater picture. I still have that old color. I'm so lazy. Look at how tiny. Look at that. It's the tiniest little space taking up in the ball is bigger than his head. But the face is all you've depended on. When we get rid of the face, what's left? What do we see? What do we read? What do you read? First of all, his knee isn't breaching this. His just kind of melted into the background. Everything has that Mars style color value and everything. Even the foreground isn't as black as it needs to be. So I love the sky though. The sky looks great. It looks like it's low and angry. I love that. I would ask you to go back and hand them in. I want to see responses to these critique hours. So I want to see some thumbnails done by you for this demon. I want to see different ways you are recreating the feeling of fear in this new great power ball that he's looking at. I want to see how he's interacting with it to represent his courage required in order to interact with it, having known what it's capable of, as well as the fear, having known what it's capable of. Okay. So this one is by Emma Dahl, a former student of mine. Hi, Emma. And, excuse me. And I'm just going to have a sip of water. And what we've created here is like another magic ball, another source of power. And I like what you've done with all of this, but you still need to control your environment. So gesture's great. Look at that. Look at how she looks like she has the courage to move forward, but the caution having known what this power ball is capable of. Love, 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 love the gesture. Really amazing work. Round of applause for Emma. But your environment perspectives, what we're seeing in that other component in the description I gave you guys. So gesture, expression, costume, and then environment and depth for creating space. Everything feels like it's neighboring. Everything feels like it's brushing shoulders, rubbing elbows. Nothing feels far away, and that's because nothing is established as up close enough. So what I'm going to do here is just set this up so that we have a separation. I'm going to save this lasso as well. Some of my lasso will be lost in a second. The best way to tell if you have good depth perspective is if Istebrak is trying to capture your middle ground and foreground. If the lasso keeps melting in between other components, it means that you don't have enough contrast between each perspective layer. Right? So now I have to hand lasso. It's a good way to test it. Solid way to test whether or not your contrast is enough for your depth. Almost always you guys hear me saying, enough contrast, foaming at the mouth, telling students enough with the contrast. And I understand that you guys have built this kind of fear. You want to paint for me, you want to paint for the teacher, impress the teacher. But that's usually, when we see super amount of contrast, it's when students are first timers with environment, when they're doing the first couple 14-day challenge portraits. That's usually when we see problems with contrast. You guys are so advanced on your what you're doing that you really shouldn't fear contrast that much. Interesting, look at this. So I used the black to find my lasso, which made the scene so dark. But it kind of works. It kind of works because it's kind of made it look like a tavern that she's, not a tavern, what am I saying? Cavern that she's found in this deep catacombs, and what's happened is cave, and the light is the only source. But here you have a universal light. So I'm going to respect your wishes. I'm not going to make it fully black because that's a cop-out. What I will try to do is follow your perspective, but sacrifice some of the units you have in here. So either it's a crystal that's flowing, glowing that's floating and glowing, or it's a crystalline, a sphere crystal, or it's a crystalline rock formation. Don't try to do all at once. Not everything is magical. Not everything glows with the power of 17 suns. You really are having a lot of trouble figuring out the focal point because you've chosen two really interesting units as the focal point. This fog here is not helping because it seems to only exist in the outside. Fog is moves over everything, foreground, middle ground, background. So I'm going to consider the fog later. This is not the right value, by the way, that I'm using. But I'm just trying to put everything, find where everything is situated all. I'm going to use levels. Okay, apart from the foreground, this is the second darkest area in the canvas. And so let's see if this is pure black here. Not pure black enough, so I get to drop one level lower. Oh, come on. Let me make it 16. Alright. So I get to make the foreground objects, these rocks, a bit black, a bit more black. So that's good. So I don't have to worry about this being that black, because for a second the foreground rocks and this mixed together. And then we have the stuff right behind. So I'm going to select inverse. I'm going to add this, actually, select inverse. Go back to this area here. And I'm just going to start considering which areas would have more contrast. So there's two ways to do it. You can add more contrast where the object is glowing, because these individual rocks here, where they're glowing, they're creating a silhouette. Then I'm going to bring in the contrast for the focal point, because it being a light source needs much more brightness on it. It needs to glow, the subsurface glow. Sometimes there's two types of subsurface that you might encounter as an artist who paints fantasy style illustrations. One is light from another source moving inside the shape that came and got caught in the shape. One is the shape itself is glowing with magic, which we don't see a lot in the real world. So that's why I'm saying it's specific to fantasy artists. Stuff is always glowing with magic of, you know, whatever it is that's making the magic glow. So when you do that, this subsurface scattering that you're used to seeing in the real world is actually not bright enough to make it seem like this object is glowing. Sometimes you do have in the real world like those really cool salt lamps that have a light on the inside. They're actually bright. They do glow. Sorry, one second. So when you have a lamp that's a cool rocky shape or some cool rock texture, you'll have more of that glow. But it's most of the glow should be happening like on the inside, moving out if it's some sort of magic. And then the outskirts kind of get that color. And then we will have on a separate layer the glow required, which you had before, but you were sharing it with that big sphere. Oopsie. The glow required to make it feel like this is actually a light source. Then there is blocking in, using this light source color, all of the areas here that are nearby this shape, almost like a watery surface, a rocky surface. So you do have that, but I don't think it's an actual reflection. It doesn't feel like this is some sort of rocky texture, fine, and maybe it was some kind of pedestal made by priests from a long time ago or something like that. And then we have a lot of that brightness needed on the rocks nearby. That's why I was selecting this. So I can darken as much as I need to now that I've thrown in that glow. Oops, select inverse. So some of these areas nearby, depending on how bright I made that light source, would actually go darker, because it's just that contrast that is required for a focal point. And I'm just going to make the area around her glow a little bit more. Kind of like she has her own light or her own stage. Another thing that you can do is dim the entire scene. And make us, like, not make this light so strong that it can even reach the floor. And then bring in another kind of spotlight here, just wherever the sun is breaching through this cavernous area. But if this is outdoors, which I think you are going for an outdoor scene, it needs to be a little bit more open if there was a daytime. So I'm trying to find this sweet spot between the both of them, where it's dark enough that this acts like the only light source, but it's enough brightness coming in. And I'm going to bring in some kind of cinematic spotlight. It may not work because I have to select the foreground, but it's something that'll bring in another universal brightness somewhere here. Excuse me. So, just like that, a little bit of brightness. Just moving across the cavernous area behind her. Just like so. So you have all that brightness here. And you have a dark scene as required. But at the same time, you have what you need in order to reveal the characters and what they're doing in here. And then there's the monochromatic feel. You have this only one little gem of brightness. So I'm just going to grab this blue, get a color layer, and just bring in some more colors. There's no reason why this magic has to glow with one individual color. You can have neighboring colors moving in here, bringing in a new change in the color temperature and the hue. Probably some of this blue might actually work very well. It's just a color change. I'm going to go back, maybe some yellow around the hottest area. Actually, yellow won't work. Yellow doesn't go too dark. So I'm just going to get some of that blue, move it in. And then finally, I'm going to readjust this dark value here so that it just glows individually. And this character needs a lot more contrast, so that contrast is kind of lost with all the editing I've been doing. So I'm just going to go back to that. And select, go to before I did that, and just delete. Love the gesture, love the character, love what the simple hairstyle that reads anyways, love the sword, the size of the sword, the style of the legs, how we can see the costume so easily, we can read it so easily. Really nice work. Okay, so I have a little bit more of that. And then finally, there's just the color of the whole background situation, what we're doing with the background. So there's the color of the environment versus the green here. You can do a lot more with the environment. You can make the environment more of a blue. You can keep it gray and just make everything in the foreground green. It's just glowing green. You can have a little bit more style that way. But we've added the right amount of contrast to create that depth, so things in the background really do look like they're in the background. Here, things in the background don't really read as part of the background as much because we have a lot of neighboring values between this level and that level in the sky. We've darkened it enough so that the scene looks strong. And then what I'm going to do is deselect. Unlock this and then just bring back that fog. Okay, so on top of this layer, I'm just going to bring back that gray fog. Don't try to bring back a fog color that matches. Just bring in that gray fog as you need it. And then fog goes over everything, so there's fog over and in front of the background. Oops. As dark as the background is. I mean foreground, sorry. And I'm just going to flatten the image and bring in dodge tool just wherever this little spotlight happened. And I'm going to blur the edges of this magical cube. And some of it does need a bit more strength towards kind of like the base and a bit more shadow. So we darken the room and it's just this eerie kind of like throne that's illuminating everything. And then finally I'm just going to throw in some more of that color over anything nearby. It's just going to throw off its color as much as possible. Not in this area, but in this area. Just towards the tops. The further you get from the glowy object, the less of that color is going to take over. Oh, whoopsie. You can just use this color here to limit where that glow is moving. And because this is the focal area, I would need to see better description of the rocky kind of surface she can walk on. It all seems very rough. I would love to see more of an interesting shape here for the rock itself. Like it could be a little bit more of a like a mutated kind of rock structure, like what we see with those really interesting geological kind of rock formations by magma or underneath, or diamonds underneath the surface of the earth. Something a bit more interesting because it is part of the focal point, so it should have more of a presence. And it just keeps growing on itself like one big rocky tumor type thing. The shapes of the rocks keep repeating, so this could have been really, really great because you're not using this space up here. This would have been great if you had had something like, you know, big rib-like rocks. They're all of different sizes. They all have different shapes, and they could have all been the same little rocky shape here that she's within. This big hand kind of like formation, like a big explosion that froze as soon as it exploded. And that would have been kind of like a better way to encase and fill in all the negative space around the character. Let me just make that green so it feels like it's part. Just something like that. And these are really easy additions. It's not a lot of rendering that's required. You can look up some really simple slate style rock surface texture, and that would have been enough. Okay, and then we're moving on to this piece here. So this is a conversation between two characters, and her magic is kind of taking over the entire scene. She's something about demanding the old ways. She's just a very dominant character. Her magic is explosive. So this character who's put her foot down and is trying to dominate over the entire family, or I'm not sure how to describe what you meant by, you know, what you wrote in regards to her power and what she was doing. If she was the tyrant, if she was the good person saying no more, if she was trying to escape the family. But a character that looks like this, looking gently off into the distance, is a calm character. She seems like she's holding something more that brings her calm than something that brings her power. And then you adding all this jagged rock, it's like you told the rock to do more work than it's capable of doing. You know, you've added the texture here, you've made it look angry. This character is barely visible, so it's hard to tell they're having a conversation. He feels like he's creeping on her or stalking her than really having a conversation with her where he's afraid. So a camera angle that's a little bit more low, her towering over him, kind of like saying, you know, this is me and this is my power, and she's just, you know, arching her back forward, and maybe her hand is still holding the necklace, and the character is like, no, what you're doing is wrong, stop. You know, have a more, again, the scene that the cameraman would take a picture of. You know, have some common sense. What are you doing? And then you see all the ground beneath and the floorboards kind of like moving up as her magic kind of takes over the scene. And you got like this lava type thing coming out of the ground beneath her. Like the whole place is just boiling up. And you have little pieces of floorboards moving. You've got some really cool worm's eye perspective moving across the room. You know, you're seeing some of the ceiling of the room. Maybe the ceiling is like a really, maybe the whole room is just a super, like a suite, you know, like it's got a lot of, you know, I'm really into like home decor, so it's got like a lot of really cool crown molding, and you've got like sconces, and you've got really cool stuff, but it's all falling apart. The wallpaper is starting to bleed and kind of wither and curl, and the guy's like, stop, and you have this really cool like ceiling design here, and then you have her gesture kind of like dominating the entire scene, and it's a nice low camera. Here it's very calm, nothing's really happening. Here there's something happening, and the viewer wants to know what it is, and again, that's how you capture your viewers in this really advanced kind of storytelling where the character is just about to explode. You can make her just about to explode and keep the camera angle exactly where it belongs. She can just be like leaning, looking down at him. We're still making her look like she's towering over, but she, you know, her arms on her side, and him saying, no, stop, you know, you have to follow the old ways, would make for a better description here of of the kind of threat that she's bringing in. And that's all to do with the fact that we lowered the camera. So if you're still having trouble finding exactly what value the camera has in your storytelling, go back to the critique hours from last year and take a look at them. They do discuss a lot to do with the camera, the power of the camera angle. The camera has everything to do with how we are, as a viewer, involved in the storytelling. And then this one is a character who made a mistake by I don't know, he had like sexual relations with a demon, so she constantly haunts him. She wants him to be hers, and then he's a very devout, God-fearing character in whatever the religion is in the world. So what's happening is a lot of you chose really dark scenes, and these dark scenes are another little bottle just hanging out. These dark scenes are very difficult to render for a lot of you because you're choosing specific zones of light source. Apart from the monochromatic look and the fact that everything is happening in Mars, it's pretty good control over your light sources. The story is pretty good. The framing is pretty good. I can understand what's happening here. Excuse me 1 second. So what I would want you to do is just think about, is this the frame that I would choose for this scene? You know, is this the best frame? It's a good frame, definitely. You have everything rendered as you need. You have all the textures as I've described. The fabric is a little bit sheer. It's not really cascading. It's more flowing. What I wanted by cascading fabric was fabric that's drawn down into gravity, which is more difficult to render because you have a lot of those swooping curves that you have to, and gradients involved in that. A lot of layering in the fabric, which is a test of your edge work, all of the technical stuff. But the candles look great. The character's gesture looks great. A lot of expression, but you didn't hold the expression so much as the way to pull off the read of the character's fear and prayer is this kind of begging God to help him. This character that he had to help, this demon, when she was really weak, he couldn't resist her, so now she's trying to lure him in. He made a simple fire so that he could find some protection in the night, but she keeps haunting him. She finds him, and whenever she does, or at this particular moment, he is begging God for help and forgiveness because he realized she is actually a danger to him. So another way you could have, another frame I would have recommended is him praying kind of like with the camera in front of him. So he's praying this way, maybe, you know, he's just supplicating. His hands are hiding his head, his shoulders are hunched, his arms are like this, just praying away. The candles are somewhere in the foreground. A simple little thing that he set up. If he's a traveler, why is he holding so many candles with him? Why are there so many candles? It could have just been one really beautiful candle, and the flame is kind of starting to climb up because she's present. So this character of you know, fire and flame and hellfire and whatnot. So this simple candle could have started to act up. And right behind him, we see a really kind of like a twisted shape. You can't make her too human because then it just looks like a simple human dancer. You want to make her surreal. One of the ways to do that is to just get rid of her feet, not make her grounded. Make her more of like a genie feet, which is that flowing level of like the non-grounded float. It's kind of magical float to her and the way she dances. And then she can't be, I like how she's looking at him. She's her target. So the character is looking at him from behind him. We've got some, like, you know, ruins here from the campsite. And she's slowly starting to just get stronger and stronger as she haunts him. You definitely have to show some curves. She is a temptress, a succubus. But you have to show that she's a bit haunting. So maybe a low head. Kind of as she's rising, her head is low. This is her shoulder line. These are her elbows, and she's just starting to rise upward and haunt him out of the flame of the fireplace that he made. And he sees her. He can't look at her. If he does, he'll succumb to her, and probably she'll kill him. And that's a really great way to describe the story. Where I would place the camera is right here on the table, somewhere nearby where we can see him praying and we can see her slowly towering over him. Camera angle contrast issues. Y'all did really good with the textures. I think you guys did great. This gem color here feels a little bit not yellow enough, but the green is yellow enough for it to fit in the color. The palette that you're using, the atmospheric color of this kind of like red environment. What else I would add? It's a very particular scene, a succubus kind of moving out of the fire, manifesting through the fire and haunting this poor man. It could be that, you know, he's not facing the flame. It could be that she's towering over him, but he's somewhere here crouched over. He knows, he's familiar with this. He knows what's going on. He's just there cowering away, crying away, praying to God to help him. And he's just there sitting, you know, and he's used to it, but she's there just dancing away at the fire nearby. Maybe there's some kind of way in the story where he just takes the fire and maybe he's on his way to find a healer or some kind of person to bless him to help him get rid of this curse. So what he's going to do in the story immediately, in the immediate story, he'll just suffocate the fire so that she disappears. And he'll just sleep in the cold night and he'll just have to make do. It's a very quiet scene and compared to all this other stuff we've seen, but there's still ways to frame it where you can show the fact that she's not necessarily a good guy. She's not his friend. She's not here for his benefit. She's actually going to kill him and his help for her. She's not really doing him any favors, especially after he made him. He did her a favor by helping her survive and whatever it is that he did with her. Thank you everyone for handing in your homework. I really appreciate the time you guys took to hand these pieces in. If there was anything left, I'll take a look at it the next time we do a critique hour together. I'll be uploading the sketch journal time-lapse of my recent stuff soon, as well as the other rewards for this month, and I will be uploading the assignment for this month as well. You guys will be doing a villain challenge very soon along with the rest of the community. Yours will be a little bit more advanced in that I will again have more continuous texture requirements for each illustration just to keep you guys on your feet. A lot of you who are new, please look at the old assignments. Try some old stuff and hand it in. I'd love to take a look at it. Just at me so I can find it. The critique community, the homework correction, the community critique only text channel is hard for me to move through. Sometimes you guys are just having conversations amongst yourselves. But if you do want me to specifically take a look at your work, just at Istebrak and I'll be able to catch it. Thank you everyone for your patronage. I'm really excited for the new year. I'm so excited for the villain challenge. I really can't wait. It's just going to be so awesome. It's my favorite challenge I've ever hosted in the community. We did it like 3 or 4 years ago. 2 years ago. No, 2 years ago. Something like that. And the stuff that was handed in was so great. It was just so wonderful. I'm going to be a little more specific. Nothing modern. All fantasy. It has to be magical components in it. It has to be a keyframe, so the villain is in their final form. They're producing some kind of magical power, and it's an illustration. It's not a standing character design. That's boring. I want to put in a full illustration requirement. It's going to be another big deal contest. So hopefully, if I do get around to it, we'll have another kind of like a big vote for who the winner is. Yours, again, will be more advanced. Yours will absolutely have to have mandatory thumbnails handed in and all that. But that's for February. That's not this month's homework. That's February's homework. This month's homework will be handed in. Will be assigned very soon. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in class. Bye.